The delegates of the Second Continental Congress had no option other than writing the Declaration of Independence. In June 1776, they wrote it to separate from King George III, who had become tyrannical. The delegates sent out an olive branch petition in July 1775, hoping for reconciliation. King George denied it, calling them rebels. King George had the responsibility of governing the colonists correctly. Instead, he stole many civic rights of the colonists, such as not giving them a voice in Parliament while taxing them and not giving the colonists fair trials. The Declaration helped change the course of history and shape America. The French and Indian War was a big push when it came to the formation of the Declaration. It would influence the American Revolution, which would be the leading cause to the Declaration and its signing. The English had just stopped fighting the French and were still forcing the Americans to pay taxes. However, even though the Americans were paying taxes for Britain, they would not have a say in how the country worked. Things like voting and petitions from America would be ignored by the British. Eventually, 12 delegates from 12 colonies would form the First Continental Congress. They would send the king an olive branch petition, which was essentially a peace treaty, but the king would ignore it, leaving the First Continental Congress with no other choice but to rebel. A man named Thomas Paine would make a pamphlet called Common Sense, which would be handed out without Thomas listed as the author. This would cause normal colonists to start to rebel. With the First Continental Congress and other colonists revolving, the American Revolution would soon start. Without the American Revolution, there would be no Declaration. And without the Declaration, America could still be a part of Britain. The Declaration of Independence goes over many ways that King George III failed his responsibility as a king, such as making the colonists pay taxes without getting anything in return, giving biased trials and jury, refusing to make necessary laws, and many more. The taxes started after the French and Indian War, ending in 1763, when the king was 75 million years in debt. Since he was in debt, he started heavily taxing the colonists to pay it back, but the king never did anything in return for the colonists. In 1765, the king implemented the Stamp Act, when the British government started taxing newspapers, almanacs, pamphlets, broadsides, legal documents, dice, and playing cards. More acts the king started were the Sugar Act and the Currency Act, both in 1764. One act that was implemented was the Quartering Act in 1765, which required colonists to pay for and house British troops that they didn't want or need. When New York refused to pay for said British troops, the king, in 1767, made the New York Restraining Act, which made it so that New York couldn't pass any laws until abiding by the Quartering Acts. The Declaration of Independence has an entire list of more than 25 reasons for writing said declaration. King George III failed his responsibility as a king, making the colonists' only choice to separate from Britain and become what we know as America today. After the Declaration was signed, there were many effects on both Britain and America. England would lose a major part of their taxpayers, and America was no longer guaranteed safety from other wars. Before the Declaration, the Americans did not have political rights, but now that they were separated from Britain, they could get these rights back. But they also had to deal with the big responsibilities, like civic and ethical ones. This meant that citizens would have to vote and pay taxes. It also meant that the government would have to make morally correct decisions while still making laws that the country needed to be implemented. Overall, the delegates' Second Continental Congress couldn't just do nothing, and were forced into writing the Declaration of Independence in order to take back their civic rights. King George III failed his responsibility as a king to take care of his people by ignoring the colonists' word and laws while heavily taxing them and being biased against them in trial. The Declaration made America into what it is today.